The tea hit him before anyone could stop it. 1 second, Amara was rushing past table 4 with a full ceramic pot. The next, she clipped the edge of a chair, and the entire contents, scalding, dark, unstoppable, splashed across the left shoulder and chest of the man who had just walked through the door. The restaurant didn't go quiet. It stopped. Completely, entirely. Like someone had reached into the room and switched off all sound. Servers froze mid-step. A busboy flattened himself against the nearest wall. The pianist's fingers hovered above the keys and never came down. Even the candlelight seemed to hold still. Because the man standing there, the one with tea soaking through $3,000 of Italian wool, was Jeon Minjae, and people had lost far more than jobs for far less than this. He walked in tonight to seal a $1 million marriage deal. He's about to walk out obsessed with the woman who just ruined his jacket. And his most trusted man, he's already deciding she needs to disappear. If you're new here, subscribe right now, hit that bell so you never miss a story, drop a fire emoji in the comments if you're already hooked, and smash that like button because this one is about to get very, very intense. Now, let's get into it. Minjae looked down at the spreading stain across his chest. The fabric was ruined, Italian wool, custom-tailored, the kind of jacket that existed in a tax bracket most people never visited. He looked at it the way a man looks at something when he is deciding, quietly, without expression, without urgency, exactly what happens next. The entire restaurant waited to find out. Then he looked up. Amara was already staring at him. She hadn't run, hadn't dissolved into the frantic, falling over herself apology that everyone in the room was silently begging her to perform. She was standing exactly where the collision had happened, one hand still gripping the now empty ceramic pot, her chest rising and falling, a little too fast, her eyes fixed on his with the particular expression of someone who is afraid but has decided, somewhere very deep and very fast, not to show it. She was 27 years old. She had been on her feet since 10 that morning. She had a contracts law exam in 11 hours, her brother Kofi's tuition due Friday, and her mother's debt collector had called twice this week already and would call again tomorrow. She had absolutely no idea who she had just spilled tea on. What she knew, what her exhausted, stretched to breaking brain registered before anything else, was that the jacket was expensive, obscenely, offensively expensive in the specific way that made her stomach clench on a good day and made something hot and involuntary crawl up the back of her throat on a day like this one. The kind of expensive that didn't just cost money, it announced money, loudly, to everyone in the room. Every survival instinct she had fired at once. And what came out was not fear. It was fury, controlled, professional, wrapped tightly enough to pass as composure if you weren't looking closely. But fury all the same, the fury of a woman who was tired and underpaid and had been holding everything together for so long that she had no patience left for the kind of problems that came with price tags she couldn't afford. "I am so sorry," she said, and her voice came out clipped and tight, and approximately 3 degrees short of the warmth she was aiming for. She was already reaching for the cloth at her apron, already moving toward him without thinking, already pressing the fabric carefully to his lapel with the practiced efficiency of someone who had cleaned up other people's messes her entire life. "That was completely my fault. I should have been watching where I was going and I wasn't, and I—" "Stop." One word. Quiet. Absolute. The kind of quiet that didn't need volume because it had weight instead. The dense, settled weight of a man who had never once needed to repeat himself. She stopped. He was looking at her the way she had never been looked at in this restaurant. Not with the entitled impatience of a man waiting for his food, not with the dismissive scan of someone cataloguing whether she was worth paying attention to. He was looking at her the way a person looks at something that has genuinely, unexpectedly surprised them, like she was a variable he hadn't accounted for, and he was recalculating in real time. "You're going to pay for it," he said, slowly, like he was still deciding whether he believed it. "Yes. You know what this jacket costs?" She looked at it, then back at him. "Probably more than my rent," she said. The silence that followed was enormous. Behind her, she could feel the entire restaurant holding its collective breath. The maitre d' had gone the color of old paper. Two senior servers near the bar were exchanging glances that meant they were already composing their accounts of what they had witnessed. The busboy near the wall had not moved in 45 seconds. Then Minjae said, "Sit me at your section." He walked past table 7 without a single glance in its direction. At table 7, Han Soyeon, daughter of crime Lord Han Dae-sul, Minjae's arranged bride, the living seal of a billion-dollar alliance between two of Seoul's most powerful criminal dynasties, sat very still in her red dress and watched him go. She was never acknowledged that evening, not once, not even a look. Amara led him to table 11 with her pulse in her throat and her face giving away absolutely nothing. She set him up with water, recited the evening specials in a voice that was completely, impressively calm, and walked away before anything happening behind her ribs could make it to her expression. She did not look back. He ordered black coffee, stayed 2 hours, spoke to no one. When he left, the tip he left behind was enough to cover a full week of her brother's meal plan at university. She found it, stared at it, then sealed it in an envelope with his name on the front and a note tucked inside. The note said, "I'm not a charity case." She left it at the host stand and went back to work. He came back the next night. Same section, same black coffee. Smaller tip this time. Appropriate, unremarkable, the tip of a man who had received a message and was choosing to acknowledge it without making it a confrontation. He sat for 90 minutes and said nothing beyond his order. She treated him like any other table. It didn't work on him. She could feel his attention between every table she turned, not hungry, not aggressive, but steady, focused. The way someone watches a thing they are genuinely trying to understand, assembling the grammar of it piece by piece. By night 4, she stopped pretending not to notice. She was reading her contracts textbook between tables when his voice came, quiet and almost incidental. "Pre-law?" "Finishing my JD," she said without looking up. "Nights." "Why nights?" "Because days cost money I don't have." Silence. "Then what kind of law?" She looked up. "The kind that helps people who can't afford the kind you probably use." It came out sharper than intended. She didn't soften it. His mouth moved, not a smile, but the architecture of one. Slow, like a thing that hadn't been used in long enough that it needed a moment to remember the shape. "Criminal defense," she added. "Before you ask." "I wasn't going to ask." "You were." The almost smile again. She went back to her textbook and told herself on the subway home that it meant nothing, that she was tired and misreading silences, that this was a customer, an unusual one, a man who carried danger in his stillness the way other men carried cologne, but a customer. Only that. She said it 3 times. She almost believed it by the time she reached her stop. Night 6 arrived the way inevitable things always do. Quietly, without announcement, dressed as something ordinary. Amara was running her closing tables when she realized she had 12 minutes left on her break and hadn't eaten since 11 that morning. She grabbed the staff meal she'd set aside, rice, cold now, slightly sad, and was heading toward the back room when something made her stop. She didn't examine what the something was. She slid into the booth across from Minjae instead. It was an impulsive, irrational, completely uncharacteristic thing to do. She was a woman who measured her movements in this restaurant the way she measured everything in her life, carefully, economically, with full awareness of cost versus benefit. She did not sit uninvited at customer tables. She did not blur the line between server and guest. She had too much to lose and too little margin for error to be careless about boundaries. And yet here she was, sitting across from Jeon Minjae, with cold rice in a container and 12 minutes on the clock, like her body had made the decision before her brain could file an objection. He'd looked at her when she sat down, not surprised, like he'd been waiting for it. That should have alarmed her. She filed it with everything else. "You never told me your name," she said. "You never asked." "I'm asking now." He looked at her across the small table. The restaurant moved around them. A woman laughing too loudly at table 3, glasses clinking at the bar, the low current of other people's conversations flowing past like water around 2 rocks. "Minjae," he said. "Amara." "I know." She held his gaze and did not flinch. "You know?" "Yes." "That's something people usually find unsettling," she said. "Most people." She opened her rice container and ate a bite because she was hungry and because performing composure on an empty stomach was a skill she had, but why use it when she didn't have to? "You're going to keep coming here," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "That's a problem." "For who?" "For me." She set her fork down. "When I figure out exactly who you are." He was quiet for a moment. The candlelight between them did something to the angles of his face, sharpened what was already sharp, shadowed what was already unreadable. "You already know," he said. "You've known since night 1. She had. She'd known the way you know a storm is coming before you can see it, in the pressure change, in the way the room rearranged itself around him when he walked in the way men who looked like bodyguards appeared at the bar without being introduced. She'd known, and she'd filed it under "not my business" and "stay in your lane, and you have enough problems, Amara." "Knowing and saying out loud are different things," she said. "Are they?" "Yes. One of them has consequences." He studied her face. She let him. She was too tired to perform anything except exactly what she was. A woman who was smart enough to understand the room she was sitting in and stubborn enough to sit in it anyway. "Then say it out loud," he said quietly. "Not tonight," she said. She closed her rice container, slid out of the booth, smoothed her apron. "Good night, Minjae." She walked away without looking back. He watched her go. He came back the next night, and the night after that, and the one after that. By the end of 3 weeks, something had settled between them that neither of them had named, and both of them could feel. A frequency, a current, the specific tension of 2 people who have decided to stand very close to a fire and are still maintaining, technically, that they are only standing near it for the warmth. He learned things about her in fragments and margins, that she sent half her tips home to her mother every week without exception, that she had a laugh she kept hidden, not the polished professional one she used at work, but the real one, sudden and unguarded, that appeared when something genuinely caught her off guard. That she was the kind of tired that lived in the bones rather than the eyes. That she was, underneath all the careful management and the measured composure, quietly, continuously, furious at a world that required this much effort just to stay level. She learned things about him too, that he was most dangerous when he was most still, that he listened the way people listened when they were actually building something from what you said rather than just waiting for their turn to speak, that he had opinions about things she didn't expect, about architecture, about the particular cruelty of systems that looked fair from the outside, about the difference between power that protected and power that simply consumed, that he came back every night not because it was tactical, because he wanted to. She knew the moment she understood that she was in trouble. It was a Tuesday when the trouble became something larger and more structural than either of them had prepared for. Minjae was in his office at midnight going through collection reports when his finance lieutenant flagged an irregularity. Routine audit, small account, a name on a payment record that his eyes passed over, came back to and stopped on. Cole, G. Monthly installment received. He stared at it. Then he pulled the full file. He read it in complete silence. The building was quiet around him. The city moved outside the windows, indifferent and continuous, doing what cities do regardless of what happens inside the rooms that look down on them. Grace Cole. A debt originating 4 years ago, a loan taken in desperation from a man named Park Chun-ho, who answered to Yoo Jin-ho, who answered to the Black Serpent, to him. The debt had been serviced monthly for 14 months. By Amara, she had been paying his organization. Faithfully, consistently, on time, every single month. Working double shifts at that restaurant, studying law at night, sending money home, holding every piece of her life in the place with both hands, and quietly, invisibly, without any idea who she was paying, servicing a debt that led directly back to the man who had been sitting in her section for 3 weeks. The man who had come back every night. The man who was, for the first time in 15 years, in the specific and disorienting position of wanting something he had not planned for. He sat with it for a long time. He thought about the way she'd looked at him across that booth. You already know. You've known since night one. He thought about the note she'd left in the envelope. I'm not a charity case. He thought about the cold rice she'd eaten without apology, the textbook with the highlighted margins, the laugh she didn't know he'd noticed. He called his finance lieutenant at 2:14 in the morning. The Cole account, he said. Close it. Sir? The debt is cleared. Tonight. Destroy the file. If anyone from this organization contacts that family about money again... He stopped. Steadied something internal. Just close it. Tonight. He hung up. Sat in the dark. Then a thought arrived that was colder than everything else, arriving late in the way the most important thoughts sometimes did, sliding under the door after everything else was already in the room. Who else has seen this file? He called Seung-ho. The phone rang out. In 11 years, Kwon Seung-ho had never not answered that phone. Not once. Not at midnight. Not at 3 in the morning. Not in the middle of anything. He answered because answering was what you did when Jeon Minjae called, because not answering was a statement, and Seung-ho had always been too careful, too meticulous, too patient to make statements before he was ready. The unanswered call sat in the quiet office like a stone dropped into still water. Minjae set the phone down slowly. He thought about Seung-ho, about 11 years of loyalty that had always felt, when he examined it honestly, which he rarely needed to, like loyalty in the way that a loaded weapon was loyal, useful, pointed in the right direction, as long as the right direction remained unchanged. He thought about what changed when a man who had spent 11 years calculating his own position looked across the board and saw the pieces had moved without him. He thought about Amara. He was at the restaurant the next evening before her shift started. He sat in her section and watched the door, and when she came through it, uniform slightly wrinkled, pen behind her ear, moving with the particular efficiency of a woman who had already done 10 things before most people had finished their coffee. He felt something in his chest do the specific thing it had been doing for 3 weeks that he had been declining to examine. She saw him and came over without being flagged down, set his coffee in front of him, looked at his face. "You look like something's wrong," she said. "I'm fine." "You look like a man who found something he didn't want to find." He was quiet for a moment. She waited. She was good at waiting. The particular patience of someone who had learned that silence, held long enough, made people feel it. "There are things about my world," he said carefully, "that are going to reach you before I'm ready for them to." She studied him. "Are you warning me?" "Yes." "About something specific?" "Yes." "Are you going to tell me what?" He looked at her. "Not tonight. Tonight I'm just telling you to be careful getting home." She held his gaze for a long moment. Something moved through her expression. Not fear, not yet, but the particular alertness of a woman whose instincts had just been confirmed. "Okay," she said simply. She refilled his coffee and went back to work. She was careful going home. It didn't matter, because Kwon Sung-ho had already been careful first. 3 days before Minjae found the file, before the unanswered phone call, before the warning he delivered one shift too late, Sung-ho had already run her name, had already pulled the thread, had already sat in his car outside Maison Noire and watched her through the window and assembled piece by meticulous piece exactly what she was and exactly what she meant and exactly what she could be used for. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday. Amara had just finished a closing shift. Her feet ached in the specific deep way that meant she had been standing too long on concrete floors with shoes that needed replacing 3 months ago. Her shoulders carried the particular tension of 9 hours of performed pleasantness. Smiling at tables, absorbing complaints, managing the controlled chaos of a high-end restaurant with the kind of invisible competence that looked effortless from the outside and cost everything on the inside. She pushed through the staff exit into the alley behind Maison Noire and stopped to breathe for a moment before the walk to the subway. Cold air, city smell, the distant sound of traffic 2 blocks over moving through the night like blood through veins. She was reaching for her earphones when the man appeared. He stepped out from the shadow beside the dumpster alcove, not dramatically, not with any visible threat in his posture. He was well dressed, mid-40s, the kind of face that was specifically designed to be forgettable. He held a manila envelope at his side with the casual ease of a man delivering something routine. "Miss Cole," he said. She went still. Not because he knew her name, plenty of people knew her name, because of the quality of stillness in him. The way he was standing, the specific, practiced neutrality of a man who did things professionally that other people only did in anger. "This is for you," he said, and held out the envelope. She took it because her hands moved before her mind caught up. He turned and walked to the end of the alley without hurrying, and turned the corner and was gone. She stood there for 10 seconds. Then she opened it. The photos came out first, 6 of them. Printed cleanly on good paper, the kind of quality that said, this wasn't a rushed job. This was a message assembled with care, with time, with the specific deliberateness of someone who wanted her to understand the scope of what they were showing her. Her brother Kofi, walking across the Yonsei campus with his backpack and his headphones, laughing at something on his phone. Time-stamped 3 days ago, her mother Grace, at the market 2 streets from their apartment, examining tomatoes with the focused attention she gave to everything. 2 days ago? Amara herself outside the night school building, standing at the bottom of the steps with her bag on her shoulder and her textbook under her arm. Yesterday, 11:43 p.m. She looked at each one. Slowly, her hands were steady. She was aware of her hands being steady in the deliberate way of someone who is choosing steadiness rather than experiencing it naturally. The note was at the bottom of the envelope, folded once. Clean handwriting. Unhurried. A woman in your position should understand the value of staying in her lane. Some doors, once opened, only close one way. The man you've been spending time with has a world that was built long before you arrived in it. It will continue long after. Make the wise choice while the wise choice is still available to you. No signature, no demands, no specific instruction except the instruction that lived underneath all the other words like a foundation under a building. Leave, or we make you leave. She stood in the alley behind the restaurant for 20 minutes. She was afraid. She allowed herself to be afraid because she was a human being holding photographs of her family taken without their knowledge, and fear was the correct and proportionate response to that. She stood with it. Let it move through her completely. The cold of it, the specific nausea of realizing that someone had been watching people she loved without her knowledge, mapping their routines, measuring the distance between her choices and their safety. She felt it fully. Then she folded the note back into the envelope, put the envelope in her bag, and started walking. Not toward the subway, toward Minjae's building. She had his address because he had given it to her on night 11. Written on a card, slid across the table without explanation, without pressure, without anything except the quiet statement of a man making sure a woman had an exit available to her if she ever needed one. She hadn't asked for it. She'd taken it and put it in her wallet and told herself she would never use it. She used it. The building was in Gangnam, of course it was, glass and steel, and the kind of architecture that communicated money so confidently it didn't need to try. The lobby security saw her coming, and she half expected to be stopped, but one of them was already on a phone before she reached the desk, and by the time she got there, he was nodding and directing her to the elevator. He was expecting her. The elevator opened directly into his apartment, and he was standing in the living room when she walked in. Already there, already facing the door, like he had been waiting long enough to position himself. He was still and in, his work clothes, jacket off, collar open. He looked at her face, and something in his own face tightened. "Show me," he said. She held out the envelope. He took it, went through it with the focused, unhurried attention he gave to everything. Each photograph examined carefully, turned over, set aside. The note read twice. Then he set it down on the coffee table and was quiet for a moment that felt very long. "How long?" he said, very quietly. "Have you known about the debt?" She stared at him. "What debt?" He looked up from the note, and she watched his face do something she had never seen it do before. Something moved through it. A fracture, small and quickly controlled, but real. Like a hairline crack appearing in something that had been engineered specifically to never crack. Like a man confronting the specific gravity of his own actions, arriving somewhere he hadn't intended them to go. He told her everything. He sat down across from her, and he told her all of it. The loan her mother had taken 4 years ago, the chain of men it had passed through, the organization at the end of that chain that bore his name at the top. The 14 months of payments she had made to his lieutenants, the file that had landed on his desk 2 nights ago, the call he had made at 2:14 in the morning to close it. He told her, without softening it, and without managing it, and without the particular kind of careful framing that powerful men used when they needed someone to receive bad news in a specific way. He just told her, plainly, looking at her the whole time. She listened without moving. When he finished, the room was very quiet. "So I've been paying you," she said. "Yes." "For 14 months. "Yes." "And you didn't know?" "No." "But your people did." "Yes." She nodded once, slowly, like she was filing each confirmation in the correct location before moving to the next one. "And the photos," she said. "Sung-ho." The name came out the way verdicts came out. Final, without appeal, with the particular flatness of a decision already made. "Your second in command?" "Yes." "The man who runs your operations when you're not in the room?" "Yes." "Who you've trusted for 11 years?" "Trusted," he said. Past tense, as of 2 nights ago. She looked at him for a long time. He held it. Didn't look away, didn't soften his expression into something more manageable, didn't offer her any of the careful reassurances that would have made this easier to receive and harder to trust. "My brother," she said. "My mother." "Untouchable. You have my word." "Your word." She said it carefully, the way you say something you're examining from multiple angles, not mockingly, something more serious than mockery. "The word of a man who runs the organization my mother borrowed money from, the man whose second in command just sent me photographs of my family." "That word." "Yes," he said. Nothing else. No defense, no elaboration, no attempt to reframe the weight of what she was holding. She was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to have edges. "It needs to mean something," she said finally. "Not because of what you are, because of what you say you are to me. Those are different things. I know the difference, and I need you to know that I know it." He looked at her steadily. "I know you do." "Then act accordingly," she said. She stood up, moved to the window. The city spread out below them, lit, continuous, entirely indifferent to the specific weight of what was happening in this room 30 floors above it. "There's something else," she said, without turning around. "Tell me." She turned, crossed to her bag, pulled out a folded set of papers, printed pages, handwritten notes in the margins, a timeline constructed in the precise, methodical way of someone trained to build arguments from evidence. She held it out to him. He took it, read the first page, then the second. His eyes moved with focused attention that slowed as he went further. In the way reading slows when the content becomes more significant. It was a file on Sung-ho, communications patterns she had noticed and documented, the way certain calls were made when Minjae was unavailable, the faces that appeared outside the restaurant on nights they shouldn't have had reason to be there. The timeline of small inconsistencies she had catalogued since the night the envelope arrived. She had cross-referenced what she knew against what she could find, built a chain of inference that a good lawyer would know how to construct and a good jury would know how to follow. She had started building it 3 days ago. She had been doing it alone. Minjae set the papers down on the coffee table. He was very still. "You were building a case," he said. "I build cases. It's what I do. Against my second in command. Against the man threatening my family. Amara." His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before. Not alarm, something more complicated. "You could have been killed doing this." "I could have run," she said simply. "I don't run." He stood up. The room felt smaller when he stood. He crossed toward her and stopped close, not invasively close, but close enough that she could see the thing happening behind his expression, the thing he was deciding whether to let reach his face. "You went after him," he said, "alone, with no protection. while he was watching your family? I had legal pads and a library card, she said, and I'm a third-year law student. I know how to build a case from public information without tipping my hand. That's not... He stopped. Not what? She asked. That's not what I expected, he said. She looked up at him. What did you expect? He was quiet for a moment, then like something escaping before he could decide whether to let it go. I expected you to run. I know, she said. Everyone does. Something moved through his face. Slow, seismic, the specific shift of a man realizing the full dimensions of something he had been only partially seeing. He reached up and, carefully, slowly, like a man touching something he was afraid of damaging, tucked a loose lock behind her ear. The gesture was so quiet it seemed to surprise even him. I'm going to handle Seung-ho, he said. I know, she said. Use the file. It's cleaner. He almost smiled. The real one this time, slower than the architecture of it, warmer, arriving with the particular quality of something that had waited a long time to be allowed. Go home, he said quietly. Your exam is in 8 days. 7, she corrected. 7, he said, go study. She picked up her bag, walked to the elevator, paused with her hand on the button. Minjae? Yes. Your word, she said, without turning around. I'm holding it. I know, he said. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. The doors closed between them. He stood in his living room for a long time after. The city spread out behind him, her file on his coffee table, the weight of 11 years of misplaced trust and 3 weeks of something entirely different settling into place around him, like a reckoning he had been walking toward without knowing the destination. He picked up his phone. He had work to do. Kwon Seung-ho had always been a patient man. Patience was the quality he prided himself on above everything else, above his intelligence, above his operational precision, above the 11 years of careful, methodical service he had given to an organization he had helped build from the inside out. While other men in their world acted on impulse and paid for it with their freedom or their lives, Seung-ho had always waited, had always calculated, had always known that the man who controlled his timing controlled his outcomes. But patience had a flaw, and watching Jeon Minjae dismantle a billion-dollar alliance for a waitress had found it. He sat in his office the morning after Amara visited Minjae's apartment and understood, with the cold, clarifying certainty of a man whose window was closing, that he had miscalculated somewhere. The envelope should have made her run. Women in her position ran. They had families to protect and no infrastructure to fight back with, and the rational choice, the only sensible choice, was to disappear quietly and be grateful they'd been given the option. She hadn't run, which meant she hadn't behaved like a woman in her position, which meant he hadn't correctly identified what her position actually was. He pulled up the surveillance feed from outside Minjae's building. Watched the timestamp. She'd arrived at 11:52 p.m. and left at 1:34 a.m., an hour and 42 minutes. He thought about what an hour and 42 minutes looked like between a man and a woman, when the man was Jeon Minjae, a man who conducted most conversations in under 20 minutes, who made decisions in the time it took most people to find a seat, who had never in 11 years allowed anyone to occupy his space for that long, unless they were necessary. She was necessary. That was the miscalculation. He hadn't accounted for necessity. He'd accounted for infatuation, temporary, manageable, the kind of thing that burned itself out when confronted with consequence. He hadn't accounted for the possibility that Minjae had looked at this woman and found something he actually needed, something structural, something that changed the load-bearing architecture of who he was rather than simply decorating the surface of it. Seung-ho closed the feed. He thought about Han Soyeon, about the alliance, about everything that marriage would have secured, not just for Minjae's organization, but for the men inside it, for him. About the position he would have occupied in a merged dynasty, the power that would have flowed naturally to the man closest to the center. He had spent 11 years being the man closest to the center. And now there was a woman from a restaurant standing where he had been standing. He opened his desk drawer, removed a phone, not his primary, secondary, clean, untraceable, and made a call. "I need the brother," he said, when the line connected. A pause. "The university student." "Yonsei, his name is Kofi Cole. I want him picked up tonight. Quietly. Nobody touches him. I need him as a message, not a casualty. Hold him at the Mapo location and wait for my instruction." Another pause, longer this time. The man on the other end was doing the calculation that everyone eventually did, measuring the order against the risk, the source against the potential consequence. "This is sanctioned?" the man asked carefully. "By me," Seung-ho said. "That's sufficient." He hung up. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and thought about the next 18 hours. Minjae would discover the file irregularity or he wouldn't. It didn't matter now. The Cole debt was either closed or it wasn't. It didn't matter now. What mattered was the next move, which was not leverage anymore. Leverage required the other person to have something to lose that they valued more than the fight. He had underestimated how much Minjae was willing to lose. So, leverage was finished. What came next was simpler, older, the solution that men in their world returned to when everything else had been exhausted or had failed. Elimination. Not Amara, not yet, not directly, not in a way that could be traced back before he had repositioned himself safely. But Kofi, the brother, held, threatened, used to maneuver Amara away from Minjae's orbit permanently and publicly in a way that said to everyone watching that this woman was a liability and attachment to her came with costs that compounded. And if that didn't work, it would work. It had to work, because the alternative was a conversation with Minjae that Seung-ho was not yet ready to have. He was reaching for his jacket when his phone rang, his primary phone. He looked at the screen. Minjae. He sat very still for 3 full seconds. Then he answered, "Sir, where are you?" Minjae's voice was its normal temperature, flat, unhurried, the voice of a man who had never needed inflection to communicate intent. "Office?" Seung-ho said. "Working late." "Come to the Hanam building, now." The line went dead. Seung-ho sat with the phone in his hand and understood, in the particular way that men understand things, when there is no longer any profit in not understanding them, that the window had not merely closed, it had locked. He made one more call on the secondary phone, 3 words delivered quickly, and then straightened his jacket, checked his expression in the dark screen of his desk monitor, and went to meet the consequences of 11 years of careful patience finally running out. What happened at the Hanam building is not a story that needs every detail told. What needs to be told is this. Minjae had the file. Amara's file, the one she had built alone on legal pads with a library card and 3 years of law school, and the particular furious intelligence of a woman who did not wait to be saved. He had spent the hours between her leaving and Seung-ho arriving cross-referencing it against his own records, filling in the gaps she couldn't have accessed, assembling the complete picture of 11 years of loyalty that had always been loyalty to an outcome rather than to a person. When Seung-ho walked in, Minjae was standing at the window, He didn't turn around. "You ran the Cole name," he said. Seung-ho said nothing. "You flagged her as leverage 3 weeks ago." Still not turning. "You sent the envelope. You ordered the surveillance on her family." Now he turned. "And tonight you made a call from a secondary phone to the Mapo location." The silence in the room was absolute. "The brother," Minjae said quietly, "is already home. My men reached him 40 minutes before yours did." Something moved through Seung-ho's expression, the first uncontrolled thing Minjae had ever seen on that face. Not fear exactly. The recognition of a man who had played a long game and was only now seeing the board clearly enough to understand he had already lost. 11 years, Minjae said. "Everything I did," Seung-ho said, carefully, "was for this organization." "No," Minjae said, simply, without anger, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. "Everything you did was for your position in it. Those are different things, and I know the difference." He let the echo of Amara's words sit in the room between them. Seung-ho heard it, understood it, and understood finally what he had actually been dealing with. Not an infatuation, not a temporary disruption, but a woman who had gotten inside the architecture of Jeon Minjae and rearranged something foundational, something that couldn't be moved back. "She's going to be a problem," Seung-ho said. "A last argument, an exit through a door that was already closed. For everything we've built, for the alliances, for the—" "She's not a problem," Minjae said. "She's the only person in 3 weeks who told me the truth without calculating what it would cost her first." The conversation ended there. What happened next happened efficiently and without excess. Seung-ho was removed from his position, from the organization, from the city. Thoroughly. Finally. In the way that men like Minjae handled things that had grown too close to something irreplaceable, not with anger, but with the cold, complete professionalism of a man ensuring that a threat did not have the opportunity to reconstitute itself. The Mapo location was shut down. The men involved were reassigned or removed, depending on their degree of involvement. Every thread that led back to the secondary phone was followed to its end and cut. It took 4 days. It cost Minjae significantly, in money, in political capital, in the careful architecture of internal trust that took years to build and could be damaged in an evening. He had known it would cost him before he started, and he paid it without hesitation and without complaint. The Han alliance was the harder conversation. Han Dae-sung was not a man who absorbed humiliation gracefully. His daughter had sat at a reserved table in a red dress and been ignored for an evening, and then the engagement had been dissolved with a phone call and a compensation package. Generous, diplomatically handled, face-saving in the technical sense, but face-saving only in the way that acknowledged the face had needed saving in the first place. Minjae had the conversation personally. Flew to Busan, sat across from Han Dae-sung in his private office, and restructured the alliance on terms that gave the older man more of what he actually wanted: market access, territorial agreements, operational cooperation, without the marriage at its center. It took 6 hours. It required Minjae to give more than he would have given from a position of full strength. He gave it. Han Dae-sung walked him to his car afterward and said, in the particular tone of a man of his generation making a significant concession, "She must be extraordinary." Minjae thought about a woman eating cold rice across from him in a restaurant booth at midnight with a contracts textbook and a note that said, "I'm not a charity case." "Yes," he said, simply. "She is." On the 5th day after the Hannah meeting, Amara's phone rang at 7 in the morning. She was at her kitchen table with coffee and her textbook. 3 days until the exam now, back on schedule, the particular focused calm of a woman who processed disruption by returning to work as quickly as possible. She looked at the screen. Minjae. "It's done," he said when she answered. She was quiet for a moment. "Seungho." "Yes, my family." "Protected. Kofi has 2 men on rotation he won't see. Your mother has one. It's not surveillance. They won't approach unless there's a reason. It's a perimeter." She absorbed this. "For how long?" "Until I'm certain there's no residual exposure. 90 days at minimum." "And the debt?" "Closed. 4 days ago. There is no record." She looked at her coffee, at the textbook open in front of her, at the morning light coming through the kitchen window of her small apartment, falling across the table the way it always did, ordinary and continuous and entirely unchanged by everything that had happened in the last 2 weeks. "Thank you," she said. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't thank you? Don't thank me for cleaning up a mess that originated in my organization." She considered this. "Okay," she said. "Then I won't." A pause. "How's the studying?" he asked. Something softened in her chest. The specific warmth of being asked a small question by someone who already knew the large answers. "It's fine. Consideration doctrine finally makes sense." "It always made sense you were tired." "I'm always tired." "Less so," he said. "Soon." She didn't ask what he meant by that. She filed it in the place where she kept the things about him that she was still deciding how much room to give. "Minjae," she said. "Yes." "When this is settled, the alliance, the internal situation, all of it, I want a conversation, a real one, about what this is and what it isn't and what it would actually look like going forward. No performance, no managing, just honest." "Yes," he said, without hesitation, without conditions. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She hung up and went back to her textbook. Outside her window, the city continued, indifferent, continuous, entirely unaware that somewhere across it in an office 30 floors above the street, Jeon Minjae was sitting at his desk, not working, looking at nothing in particular, allowing himself, quietly, without tactical application, without any plan for what to do with it, to feel something that had no name in the vocabulary of the life he had built. He let it stay. The exam was on a Thursday. Amara arrived 20 minutes early, found a seat near the window, arranged her pens in the order she always arranged them, and spent the remaining time doing nothing, not reviewing notes, not running through doctrine one more time, not rehearsing the elements of consideration or the exceptions to the parole evidence rule. Just sitting, breathing, letting her mind settle into the particular quiet that preceded the kind of focused performance she had trained herself to deliver under pressure. She had been delivering under pressure her entire life. This was just another room. She finished the exam 40 minutes before time was called, reviewed her answers once, made 3 small corrections, set her pen down and walked out into the afternoon and stood on the steps of the building in the thin winter sunlight, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, the specific lightness of a weight being set down. Her phone buzzed. "Minjae?" How was it? Not a question. The particular syntax of a man who already assumed a certain answer and was giving her the space to confirm it. She almost smiled. "Amara. Fine, come over." She had never invited him to her apartment before. She stared at the message after she sent it, waited for the specific anxiety of a line crossed to arrive. It didn't. What arrived instead was something quieter and more settled, the feeling of a decision that had been made long before the moment of making it finally catching up to itself. His response came in 11 seconds. Minjae. On my way. She got home before he did and stood in her kitchen for a moment looking at it the way you look at a space when someone who has never been in it is about to enter it for the first time. Small, organized, books stacked on every available surface, textbooks, paperbacks, a legal dictionary with so many tabs it had stopped closing properly. A corkboard above the desk, covered in case notes and highlighted, doctrine, and a photograph of her mother and Kofi at his university orientation, both of them squinting into the sun and laughing at something off camera. It was the apartment of a woman who was building something real with what she had. She put the kettle on. He knocked 11 minutes later, actually knocked, which she had not expected, which did something small and significant to her chest. She opened the door, and he was standing in the hallway in his work clothes, jacket on, looking like himself, which is to say composed and still, and carrying that particular gravitational quality that she had stopped trying to pretend she didn't feel. He looked at her face. "You passed," he said. "I haven't gotten results yet." "You passed," he said again, simply, like a fact that didn't require confirmation. She stepped back to let him in. He entered slowly, the way a person enters a space they are aware of entering, taking it in without making a performance of it. He looked at the books, the corkboard, the photograph of her mother and Kofi. He stood in front of it for a moment, and she watched him look at it and felt something open quietly in her chest. "That was his orientation day," she said from the kitchen. "He was so nervous he called me 4 times on the train there." "Was he okay?" "He was fine. He just needed someone to tell him he was going to be fine." "Did it work?" "It always works," she said. "That's the thing about Kofi. He just needs to hear it out loud. Once he hears it, he believes it completely." Minjae turned from the photograph, looked at her across the small apartment. "You do that for everyone around you," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Make tea?" "Tell them they're going to be fine," he said, "and mean it in a way that makes them believe it." She was quiet for a moment. The kettle was building toward its whistle. Outside her window, the city moved in its continuous, indifferent way. "Sit down," she said. "I'll make tea, and then we're going to have the real conversation." "I thought we had it at dinner." "That was the structural conversation," she said. "Conditions and agreements, and what this looks like logistically." She poured the water. "I mean the real one." He sat at her small kitchen table. She brought 2 cups and sat across from him, and they looked at each other in the warm light of her apartment, and neither of them spoke for a moment. "You go first," she said. He looked at his cup, then at her, and something shifted in his expression. The last layer of the controlled composure he wore the way other men wore clothing, moving aside to reveal something underneath that was unguarded and a little raw and entirely, quietly real. "I have spent 15 years, he said slowly, "building a life that was specifically designed to not need anything. Not because I didn't want things, because wanting things in my world made you vulnerable, and vulnerability was the one thing I could not afford." He paused. "I was very good at it, the not needing. I had convinced myself it was strength." She listened without moving. "And then you spilled tea on my jacket," he said, "and looked at me like I was an inconvenience you intended to address efficiently and get on with your evening. And something—" He stopped, started again. "Something in me recognized you immediately, not your face, not anything I could name, something underneath all of it, like a frequency I had forgotten existed and suddenly could hear again." The apartment was very quiet. I came back every night, he said, because every night I left I felt the specific absence of something I hadn't known I was missing until I'd been in the room with it. That is not a comfortable thing for a man like me to admit. It has no tactical application. It cannot be managed or controlled or structured into something useful. He looked at her directly. It is simply true. And you asked for honest. So that is the honest version. Amara held his gaze. She had prepared, on some level, for this conversation, had rehearsed her composure, had told herself she would receive whatever he said with the measured, clear-eyed assessment she brought to everything, processing it, weighing it, responding from a place of deliberate thought rather than immediate feeling. She had not prepared for the way his voice sounded when it stopped managing itself. "My turn," she said. He waited. "I knew what you were on night one," she said. "Not the specific details, the shape of it. I have grown up around enough dangerous men to recognize the particular quality of stillness that means someone has learned to be very careful about what they allow themselves to feel." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "And I told myself every single night for 3 weeks that I was a woman with a law exam, and a brother in university, and a mother with a debt, and I had no margin, no room, no business, sitting across from you in a restaurant booth at midnight like it was something I had the luxury of doing." "But you sat down," he said quietly. "But I sat down," she said, "because something in me recognized something in you, and I have spent my entire life being sensible and careful and economical with my heart. And for once, I didn't want to be." She looked at him. "You came back every night, and you never asked me for anything, and you listened like what I said was worth building something from, and you looked at me like I was—" She stopped. "Like you were what?" he said, very quietly. "Like I was the most interesting thing in the room," she said. "Not the most convenient, not the most beautiful, not the most useful, the most interesting. Like I was a thing worth understanding completely." She felt the warmth of it moving through her as she said it, the truth of it, arriving without the armor she usually kept it behind. "Do you know how rare that is? For a woman like me, in rooms like the ones I have to walk through every day, to be looked at like understanding me completely is something worth spending time on?" His jaw tightened, not with tension, with the specific, controlled emotion of a man receiving something he had not known he needed to hear. "I want to understand you completely," he said. "I think it would take a very long time." "I think so too," she said. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I know," she said. "Neither am I." The city moved outside her window. Seoul in the early evening, lit and continuous and entirely indifferent to what was happening in this small, warm kitchen, which was exactly right because what was happening in this small, warm kitchen was not for the city. It was not for anyone outside this room. It was simply two people sitting across a kitchen table with cups of tea going slowly cold between them, having said the true things finally, feeling the specific relief of truth received and held carefully by someone who understood its weight. Minjae reached across the table, not dramatically, not with any of the choreography of romantic gesture. He simply reached across and covered her hand with his thumb moving once, slowly, across her knuckles, and looked at her with the expression she had spent weeks cataloguing and had finally completely understood. It was not the expression of a man who was in control. It was the expression of a man who had decided, consciously and entirely, to stop needing to be. She turned her hand over under his, laced her fingers through his fingers, felt the warmth of it moving up through her arm and settling somewhere deep and foundational. "The tea," she said after a moment. "Do you want to know something?" "Tell me," I almost didn't take that shift that night, she said. I was exhausted. I had asked to swap with another server, and she said yes, and then she cancelled last minute, and I almost called in sick anyway. He was quiet for a moment. What made you go? My mother always said, show up even when you don't feel like it, because you never know what the showing up is actually for. She looked at their joined hands on the table. I thought she meant the money, the tips. I thought showing up was for the shift. It wasn't, he said. It wasn't, she agreed. Outside, the city continued. Inside, in a small, warm kitchen with books on every surface and a corkboard full of case notes and a photograph of two people laughing in the sun, two people sat with their hands laced together across a kitchen table and let the evening settle around them like something they had both, separately and at great cost, been building toward for a very long time. Not a perfect life, not a simple one, not a life without cost or complexity or the particular ongoing negotiation of two people whose worlds were very different, learning to make one world that held both of them honestly, but a real one. Warm, present, chosen, with eyes completely open. There are things this story is about that are worth saying plainly now that it is over. It is about a woman who carried everything, her family's debt, her brother's future, her mother's safety, her own ambitions, and never once mistook the weight for weakness. Amara Cole did not need saving. She needed accurate information and a partner willing to stand next to her rather than in front of her. The moment she had both, she was completely, quietly unstoppable. It is about a man who built his entire life around the control of outcomes and mistook that control for living. Minjae is not a romantic figure because he is powerful or dangerous. He is a romantic figure because he met a woman who told him the truth without calculating the cost, and he chose, voluntarily, at significant personal expense, to be changed by it. That choice is the only version of that change that means anything. It is about showing up. Amara almost didn't take that shift. She was tired. She had every reasonable excuse not to go. She went anyway because her mother told her to. Show up, even when she didn't feel like it. The most important moments of our lives do not announce themselves in advance. They arrive disguised as ordinary evenings. The only way to meet them is to be present for the ordinary ones. It is about the kind of love that does not ask you to disappear into it. The love in this story did not require Amara to become smaller or quieter or more manageable. It required Minjae to become larger, more honest, more vulnerable, more willing to feel things that had no tactical application. Real love expands the people inside it. It does not compress them. And it is about staying. Every instinct said run. She stayed anyway, not recklessly, with clear eyes, with conditions, with the full understanding of what she was walking into. That clarity is what made the staying powerful. She did not stumble into love. She walked into it deliberately on her own terms with her own name on the door. That is the whole story. Thank you for staying until the very last word. If you made it here and through every conversation, every confrontation, every quiet moment in a restaurant booth, and every loud moment in a Hannum building office, and finally to a small, warm kitchen with 2 cups of cold tea, then you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Drop a comment right now and tell me which moment broke you open. Was it the envelope in the alley, the file she built alone on legal pads? The dinner where they said the structural things? Or was it the kitchen? His hand covering hers, the truth, finally said out loud, the city moving outside the window, not caring at all. Tell me. I read every single one and I respond to more than you think. If you are not subscribed yet, please do it right now. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell, because the next story is already written, and it is going to find you in a feeling you did not know you were carrying, and it is going to name it perfectly. And if you know someone who needs a story about a woman who showed up tired and stayed brave and chose herself even while she was choosing someone else, share this with them tonight. This story was for them. It was for you. Thank you for being here. See you in the next one.